Well, the new Disability Act of 2005 goes some way, I believe, in meeting the Irish government's requirements under the new EU directive on general procurement policy, which was passed at the EU in 2004, has to be transposed by February 2006. And our new Disability Act goes that direction insofar as the general directive stipulates that countries must make sure that where feasible, purchasers must identify accessible services. They must include accessibility as a criterion. They have to make sure that what they buy is accessible to people with disabilities. The EU directive also allowed for countries where they so chose to include corporate social responsibility in their procurement policies. For instance, countries can choose to decide that they will include in their national procurement laws that you can set as a criterion the purchase of goods from companies that have disability-friendly policies. That is not mandatory in the EU directive. It is an option. Within those options, the Irish government has legislated for accessibility, but goes only that far. It goes as far as to say that public purchasers must set as a criterion the purchase of accessible goods. So when they're looking at a tender, they have to look at the accessibility of the goods that are provided and award points for accessibility, notwithstanding some of the caveats in the legislation. If it's too expensive, if it would take too long to purchase a good, or if such a good isn't developed yet, if it hasn't been invented. In fact, public bodies have to, when they're setting out their tender, they have to identify that accessibility of the good or the service provided will be identified, will be considered. So it's no surprise. Every tender that goes out under the national procurement laws will have to identify accessibility as a priority, unless, of course, as I've said, it's either impossible, it's far prohibitive in cost, or it will take too long to produce. So SMEs will have to be thinking accessibility when they are pitching their services, when they want to provide a new computer system to a government public body. For an SME who's deciding to go into catering, they will have to identify when they come in with their catering facilities, are those facilities accessible to people with disabilities? So it'll have to be thought of at the tendering stage. There's no provision in current national procurement law that would allow for any agency to allow bonus points for disability-friendly policies. Right now, the criterion in the Disability Act are limited to ensuring that the concept, that the issue of accessibility is considered at the tendering and procurement stage. And by that, we mean the accessibility of a good or a service. So the accessibility of ICT would be, for instance, the bank link machines. Are they accessible? Is the body who's providing those new suite of bank link machines, if that could be, or any other type of external ICT, is it at a particular height that would allow people with wheelchairs to use it? Is it accessible in that way? Is it pitched in such a way that people with visual impairments or lower levels of vision could see it? Okay, so there will be elements of accessibility that must be considered. The catering example is when somebody comes in with a whole suite of not only the food, but the facilities. Is there provision for people who are mobility impaired? Okay, but there is no provision in the legislation to go beyond the accessibility criterion. And having said that, the limits in the legislation are very clear. That a head of an organization has to make a decision as to whether the accessibility provision is either too costly, could take too long, or is simply not available. So there are conditions on the accessibility provision. The small and medium enterprise community in Ireland can go a long way to helping itself in terms of the new requirements under the legislation by taking advantage of the FOSS initiative around disability awareness training. There are grants that are now offered to private sector employers through FOSS to enable the training of staff around disability awareness, to enable the upskilling of the whole range of people working in the private sector so that they are more cognizant of the needs of people with disabilities. It won't be easy, it won't happen overnight that small and medium enterprises can understand accessibility requirements if they don't take and make efforts to train their people around disability awareness. So I would think as a first step, people should ask themselves, do I have the skills on my staff? Are my people disability aware so that when we are pitching for a new service, we have some appreciation of what are the accessibility problems for people with disabilities? So as a first step, some training. As a second step, by all means, SMEs can contact the National Disability Authority, they can contact FOSS, they can contact the Equality Authority to try to get information, to seek further information about training opportunities, to make sure they are fully au fait with A, what supports are there, and B, what requirements are there in the legislation. Along with the NDA, there are a range of agencies that can support SMEs, that can support public sector purchasers. These include FOSS, they include the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, they include specifically the Equality Authority. A range of publications are available from all of those agencies to help people understand the opportunities, the supports available, and their responsibilities under the legislation. Under the new Disability Act, public sector purchasers will be required to include in their tendering policies a consideration of accessibility. This falls under Section 27 of the Disability Act. So public sector purchasers, whoever is purchasing and whatever they're purchasing, will have to consider accessibility. This is going to have a major impact on the lives of people with disabilities, this requirement. To date, it's been left as an optional extra. But from December 31st onwards, accessibility is going to be a key feature in the purchase of new goods and services in Ireland.